My name is Chris O'Dell, but some of you may know me as Miss O'Dell. I grew up in an era of free love, flower power, sex, booze, drugs, and rock and roll. I've come back to the United Kingdom to retrace my footsteps here with filmmaker Simon Weitzman and a host of lovely people. You had to kind of walk up to my floor to get to the roof.
Who would have known that that would have been the Beatles' last concert?
Our shores is boring me to tease. Why don't you call me Miss O'Dell? I'm the only one down here who's got nothing to fear from the weight or the knife that keeps rolling on right up to my front porch. Players broken on the floor, and Benny can restore it. Won't you call me Miss O'Dell?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Natalie. I'm so happy to see you there with
Hi,
love
it's good
over
to see
your
you.
head. And Plastic, I am always happy to see you, and I love your shirt.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
coming from Tucson, I'm just saying, there's desert out there, isn't it? And they're a big country, aren't they?
A little Western, actually. No, Tucson is, yeah, very near Mexico. We're only an
Yeah.
hour from the Mexican border, and
Wow.
it is desert. It is high desert. So we've got the big saguaro trees with the arms and everything. It's
Oh,
dry as a bone. And right today, we are very lucky. It's only 92 degrees Fahrenheit, but it will be 102 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in centigrade, but it's hot.
Being there in the States, it's very easy, Chris, for a lot of people to think that you came from the UK. It's true. Because
Yes.
when I first found out about all your history with the Beatles, the Rolling Stone, and all these great rock icons, I thought she's from the UK. And then when I found out you're from America, and as a young woman, you got a job, you worked with the icons, you went like from personal assistant, you were there at Apple, then you went on to be a rock and roll tour manager. I'd say the first, you're a trailblazer. And then, of course, to have yourself immortalized by the George Harrison song Miss O'Dell. And now, in 2025, to be immortalized in a documentary directed by Simon Weitzman. And not only that, you must go out and buy the Chris O'Dell book. I've got it. It's one of my favorite books in my library. And every time I look at the picture with you and your sunglasses there, it's like a ray of sunshine that touches the world and every Beatles fan. And I want every generation of Beatle fan to know that what we're about to say today is something that's going to live on forever. Because I've got to say, I do not know of any female during the 60s, the prime time of actually, I'm just saying, free love, Carnaby Street. It was a male-dominated world, but not where you were concerned. You were right up there with everyone doing your own thing, and you are a trailblazer, and I mean that sincerely. It just comes right through. A story that is so unique that no one has it. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Yeah, I think that's true. It took a long time to get out there, too. People
Right.
told me that for years, they didn't know who Miss O'Dell was. They thought he made it up. And it was like, And then I'm on the back cover of the Stones album, Exile on Main Street. My little face is in the corner. And I was called the Mystery Woman. I'm no mystery.
Oh, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah. I was covered pretty deep. I was in deep, deep undercover. except for the bands I worked with.
Now, I've got to say this. All right. Now, working for the Beatles is one thing, but I'm sure working for the Rolling Stones, that's something completely different. And I mean, the egos you had to deal with, I'm just saying they obviously respected you because you're there with them and they're dealing with you and they're telling you their problems or whatever it is. And it's the rock and roll lifestyle. That's why it's a rock and roll documentary that you got. That's like the real rock and roll. You're not down here. It's like it's all happening up here and you're living it and seeing it every single day of your life. It must have been total craziness to a point. Would I be right?
Every so often I would think, how did I get here? And then I would think, oh, but this is so normal. I mean, it was just normal, you know? Working for the Beatles was somewhat different than the Stones because I worked at Apple. But then I worked at George's house for him for a while. But the Stones, I actually in LA, we were in LA and I was their personal assistant. So I was at Mick's house every single day, or at Keith's or someone's while they were recording the album. So that was a much more intimate relationship with them than I had. I had it with George and I had it with Ringo, but not so much with Paul and John.
Would you say the Beatles now we talk about 2025, and to me they're still the number one group, and the merchandise they're selling and the books that are coming out on the Beatles every single day, it's mind blowing. It doesn't stop. I'm trying to say to you, my allowance stopped in the 60s and we're still going with a new product. Today,
Yeah,
I need a bank to be able to buy everything that's released. I'm being honest.
exactly.
And I'm a first generation fan, and everything's coming out. Anthology Force coming out. I mean, like, it's mind blowing. The merchandise hasn't stopped, and the guy stopped in 1970. Do you find that amazing, Chris?
I think it's come back really strong in the last few years, especially. And I think Paul has something to do with that. Ringo's on tour also a lot. I think that it's tying up the legacy. I mean, it's hard to believe. When I went to work for them, I was 20, 21. They
Oh,
were in
wow.
their mid to late 20s. I mean, we were all in our 20s. Now they're in their 80s. And it's like, oh my gosh. So, of course, it's time to tie the legacy up. It's time because all that's going to be left at some point is what we've written, we've put on film, the records, obviously. That's going to be it. So it's important for that to happen now, historically. I do believe.
Well, there was something I had read that the line in the song Get Back, Jojo left his home in Tucson, Arizona. Was that
Mhm.
attributed to you?
Well, there's discussion about that. Paul has a different story in his book, and he has a different story on Get Back, although that was much closer to the time. But
Hmm.
Linda was a huge, she was a huge fan of Tucson. It's where she went to the University of Arizona here, and she
Wow.
took up photography here. And
Love her
she
photography.
Oh, amazing. And she and I talked about the big blue skies and the amazing cloud formations that she was able to photograph. So he heard a lot about Tucson at that time. As far as JoJo, George thought I was JoJo, but her ex-husband also lived here, and I think he thought he was JoJo. There are a
Oh,
few
okay.
people I think who thought they were JoJo. But I went with George. I thought, well, George will know. Anyway, that was his best guess.
Chris, I want to ask you about being a tour manager. Now, tell me about that and who you were in charge of, because this is just amazing, the list.
I went on tour with the Stones first, but after I had worked for them for a year, but I wasn't in charge of anything except Mick and Keith. And then afterwards, Bill Graham hired me. He was starting to put together those massive tours of over 100 people. And so he hired me to do Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And that was the first time that I had to set up all the logistics, so hotels, flights, and we did commercial flights on that tour, which
Wow.
is amazing. And then I went along and made sure that they were up in the morning and that their luggage was ready to go or that they were ready to go to the gig. I kind of had them at the hotel and the airport and anywhere else except for the gig. And the gig was the only time I got to sit back and have a drink.
To me, it's like a story. And when you look back at the timeline of when you were there, actually there doing all these things, I mean, you're unaware that, you know, in 2025, this is going to mean something in rock and roll history. And now you look back and go, was it a dream? Do you ever ask yourself, was that a dream? Did I actually do that? Like, I don't know how you can fathom your career. Have you taken it all in now at 2025 when you look back?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you, the CSNY tour was called a reunion tour, and it was 1974. So it was not, they hadn't been together that long, but they had that tour. I think as I look back, my life changed dramatically after I left and came back to Tucson and became a therapist, working with addiction and mental health. So I had
Oh,
this long 20-year stretch, and I was raising my son of not being too involved with the music. So having it come back again, it's kind of like, wow, that was amazing. I mean, I have to stop and think about it now. And what really gets me is that at that age, I wasn't afraid to fly to England. I would be frightened to death today to do anything like that, but it was kind of like, okay, here's your opportunity, go for it.
And I can say there was limited opportunities back then in the 60s. That's a
Totally.
fact because we had no internet, we had nothing. You know, you had to do the legwork and ring that telephone and chase people and do it all physically too.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, Richard DeLello and myself and Ron Cass, if you can count him, were the only Americans there. So I was the only American female working at Apple. And that to me is more astounding than anything, that how did I get myself in that sweet position, in 1968? I mean, it's amazing. Well, Derek Taylor helped.
In the meantime, were you keeping in contact with friends from America or obviously family and tell them I'm here in London and you knew things that were happening before they happened in America? That'd be right.
I think that, yeah, I did keep in touch with some people. My parents, of course, I would call whenever I could. And Richard was my American friend over there. But I had lived with an actress called Terry Garr. You may not know her
yes.
in
I'm familiar with
Australia,
Terry
but
Garr.
Jerry
yeah,
Gar's got a lot to do with the monkeys.
really?
I think so.
What?
Tell me if I'm right. She's got something to do with dance.
She did dance on a TV show
Okay.
that everybody was on. And then she was in Son of Dracula. Do you remember that movie? And
Yes.
what was the other one? She did a movie with Dustin Hoffman. I mean, she did a lot of movies, but when I knew her, she was dancing and wanting a part in a good movie. And she helped encourage me to come to go to London.
I just want to say Terry Gar had a connection with the monkeys because she was in the 1968 film Head. That's a connection there.
Oh, and see, I was gone by 68. So I didn't
Oh,
know that.
I'll just ask you about your time with Mickey Dolenz, if I can, Chris, if you can tell me what it was like hanging out. There was a group of you hanging out with Mickey.
Well, as I said, we were living in a house in Malibu that John Lennon had rented. It was Peter Lawford's house. It was in Santa Monica. And
really? Peter Lawford?
it was John, May Pang, Harry, his girlfriend at that time, or his later wife, Una, Keith Moon, Klaus Foreman, Ringo. It was a house full. It was a pretty amazing household. And we stayed there for a month or two. I can't remember how long. And so it became the place to go. And they would come there. It was him, Alice Cooper, different people would show up there. And other times we would go to Mickey's house in the canyon. I believe he was in the canyon at that time, one of the canyons. And he was just a really fun, full of energy, joked a lot. He was great. And, I don't know, of course, I was with John Lennon and Ringo Starr, so he was even greater because I think he pretty much admired them. So,
Well, one thing that Plastic and I were talking about was you got to tour with the Beatles and you got to tour with the Stones. And I would love to hear how you would contrast a day on tour with the Beatles as opposed to a tour with a day on tour with the Stones.
well, actually, I didn't tour with the Beatles. I toured
Okay.
with, I wasn't there that early. I came in 68. I toured with George through
Okay.
America when he did his tour. But I worked pretty closely with the Beatles during the Apple days. I mean, they were always there. Paul was the one who was there every day when I first got to Apple. And I spent the night at his house, not with him, by the way, but coming from Abbey Road, we'd go over to his house and I just stay the night. One day he said, "You want to go to work together to Apple?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay." We got on a city bus and I'm like, oh my God, this was 1968. They were huge. And I thought, people noticing him, and he was just as nonchalant. He loved to keep things really down to earth. So I knew him at the beginning very well. And when he and Linda got together, and then John, I knew mostly when I knew him at Apple. He was there every day at some point. But when he and May were together, I saw more of him. And then George, of course, I lived at his house and he was a really good friend. Ringo also. The difference was when I went to the Stones, there were a lot more drugs. And there was the whole vibe was different. It just the Beatles seemed so calm and easygoing, and the Stones seemed so on the edge all the time. And so it was a lot, and I was in a different position with them. I was their personal assistant and then went on tour with them. But so I was much more involved in their private lives, Keith and Mick mostly.
Well, I remember hearing that you were involved in some of the recording sessions. Could you talk about a little bit of that experience?
Of the Beatles and or
Yeah.
the Stones. The Beatles, yeah, I booked Trident Studios, which is where almost all of the Apple artists recorded. The Beatles started using it after they found out it was such a good studio. I think it was 8-track as opposed to EMI at that time. So I would just go and hang out. I had no other life. I mean, I'd moved there without knowing hardly anyone. And so one night Paul came and said, "We want you to come and sing on the chorus. We're going to do the chorus of Hey Jude." So I went down and sang on the chorus. It was very nerve-wracking because I'm not a singer. But Paul was leading it and he was just so excited about everything that pretty soon it was a real happy moment. It was really nice. And the first night I ever went to the Beatles session at EMI, which is now Abbey Road, Pete Shotton, John's best friend at that time, took me into the studio. Mal Evans wasn't going to let me in, but Shotton said, "Okay, do you want to come in? I'll take you in." So we went downstairs into the studio part, and pretty soon, not long after, John and Yoko came down and said, "Come here, guys, we need hand clapping." So I actually clapped my hands. I was a hand clapper on Revolution number 1. So those
Wow.
are my Beatle experiences. With the Stones, mostly I just was always there because I was helping, I was the assistant. So, but I didn't sing on anything or all I did was get on the album cover.
Now, with what's happening now with the media, right? I'm just saying, it's like now in 2025, everything is so quick and instant. It's like you've done something, something's made, and before you know it, the world knows about it. For example, the documentary Miss Odell, I've just got to say, it's really great. I saw the trailer and Leslie Cavendish was there on it. When I went to London, I was fortunate enough to have dinner. Myself and Vicky met up with Leslie and we had dinner, and that was a great night. And the fact that he was on the documentary, I mean, he's got so many stories to tell. Even in his own book, The Cutting Edge is fantastic. And I just got to say, being on the rooftop, right? Forget back. Just tell me a little bit about that, how great that was with Michael Lindsay Hogg filming and shooting everything and directing. I mean, that must have been a highlight, and not even knowing that would be the last concert of the Beatles.
Yeah, it didn't feel like it at that time. It just felt like there was this experience that was going to happen. And it turned out that after discussing everywhere across the globe, they suddenly said, we're going to go on the roof. And it's like, oh, okay, that's convenient. But we received a memo that day saying that no employees were allowed on the roof because the roof was sagging and
Oh.
it had things holding it up, and they built a stage over the roof hoping to take some of the pressure off. So we weren't allowed up there, but Tony Richmond, the cameraman, said, oh, I need your help, you come with me. And I'm like, okay. So he sat me down in next to the chimney, and then came Ken Mansfield, and then came Maureen Starkey, and then came Yoko, and we were the audience. That was it for a while. And the camera crew, and that was it. And then slowly, as the music started, people start coming out the windows and everywhere. I mean, they suddenly appeared out of nowhere. And then it looked like there were all these people. And then eventually some Apple people came up because I guess they figured why not. It was amazing. I mean, first of all, I had seen them at Dodger Stadium and they were this big. So to be sitting within feet from them and watching them play together was like, oh, yeah, much better. It was much better. So it was great. It was freezing cold. I don't know how. Paul was wearing this little suit jacket, and it was literally freezing, really
Wow.
cold.
Now, I've got to ask you a reaction. You're sitting there watching the Beatles are playing, and there come the police. What was your reaction then?
You know, we only were a block from the police department, so I don't think it was necessarily a huge surprise. In fact, I think there was a camera downstairs in reception that recorded them. And so we kind of thought that would happen. I think everybody was kind of prepared for that. But it was just kind of funny to watch it because, Mal would go and pull out a plug from the amp. I don't know if it was, I remember him pulling out George's, but apparently somewhere I heard Lennon. But they'd pull it out and then they go plug it back in. And it was like, no way are they going to stop playing. And basically, they did what they wanted to do. In fact, in my documentary, Ray Daggett, who was the policeman who came up, he even says in my documentary that actually they were on private property. He couldn't arrest them. He could have waited in the street for them to come out and arrested them then, but that would have been highly irresponsible. So it was kind of a bluff on their part too.
No, that's amazing there because I didn't know that. I didn't think of that until you just said that there. But can you imagine a different scenario to the concert that you're there and the police come and arrest them? I bet you Lennon would have liked that. You know what I'm saying? As an ending. Do you know what I mean? It's like an ending, isn't it? But
It would have been a really good ending.
Way?
Well, I was with the Stones on the 72 tour when they got arrested in Boston, the makeshift airport they made for us in Rhode Island, because our plane, the city of Boston was having they were burning it down and there were kinds of protests. So they sent our little plane to Rhode Island. And when we got there, they had made this makeshift kind of immigration and customs coming from Canada. But the photographer got in and he started taking pictures of Keith, and They said he shouldn't be here. This is like this immigration customs. He shouldn't be here. And they said, so they didn't do it. It was a setup. First they arrested Keith because he was the one who kind of gave them a lot of shit. And then Mick said, oh, well, I can't let him go alone. And then Bobby Keys went, well, I want to be part of the fun. And then Marshall Chess said, well, I better go because who's going to take care of them? So it ended up like six of them got arrested. Keith turned around and gave me his medicine bag, which I don't need to tell you what was inside of it. And at the time, I never about what I was doing. But then I just kind of went through and they didn't bother me, fortunately. And then hours later, when they finally got to the gig, that's the first thing Keith did was come over and get his medicine bag back.
I would love to hear your memories of Friar Park. Everything I've ever seen about Friar Park just looks amazing. I know you got to spend time in the catacombs and out through the gardens. Tell me about your memories of Friar Park.
I'd love to. Actually, Daniel, thanks. That was so amazing because George asked me to come and stay with them. Unbeknownst to Patty, can you imagine? He
Oh
brought me
my.
home after a session one night, he and Kevin Harrington. The place had just been I mean, they got rid of a lot of the trash that had been left there. It needed improvement. The nuns, the Catholic Church had owned it, and the nuns were taking care of the kids during the war. So there were a lot of orphans and other kids who stayed there. They covered all of the lakes up, which were connected by tunnels. They covered up geez, I can't even remember all the things, but one of the things they did is that there were little angels, Friar Park heads were the light switches, right? So the nose on, off. And there were all over the whole place were these friars' heads. And there were little angels around, and they put diapers on all the angels. So we had to get all of the paint off of the angels. When I was there was so much to do. There was no furniture in the house. So I slept in a sleeping bag. Terry Doran did, and Kevin Harrington. George and Patty had a mattress. And then slowly Patty began to bring in some furniture, not a lot. I mean, it wasn't a lot at all. But the gardens, George really got into them and they were simply beautiful. And I went back there often after I left when I wasn't living there and came back to the States. Almost after most tours, I would go straight to Friar Park because that was sort of that was home for me at that point. It was
Yeah.
just gorgeous. I haven't been back in years, but I'm sure that I probably would take my breath away if I saw it today.
Well, apparently, I'm just saying, Paddy helped him find it, and I think they bought it for 140,000
Yeah,
pounds, if I'm not right.
it was pretty cheap. It was 140,000, I think, pounds.
Yeah.
Um, which today would be a lot, but back then it was a lot too. Patty and a real estate agent called Perry. What was Perry's last name? Anyway, he was a real estate agent and he and Patty went and found it, and it was in shambles, literally. No central heating. There was no heating. It was cold, colder than the roof, actually. And so she continued. I mean, she's the one that saw the value of it there. And George loved it because he was isolated, which he was really all about at that time.
Yesterday, I got Beatle Magazine's originals right from 68, number 58, number 62, number 64. One's got a cover of Paul, one's got a cover of John, one's got a cover of Paul and Jane, and they talk about the White Album. They talk about everything like that. Now, tell me, what was it like with the release of the White Album? I'm fascinated.
Yeah, actually, they started recording it a couple weeks after I arrived in London. They hadn't even started it yet. So it seemed like it took a really long time. And they were not always in the studio together as a band. I think it may have been one of the beginning of that time where they go in and do their own thing and then leave. I mean, I hung out with George when he did Savoy Truffle, and he was the only
Wow.
person there. So, um, but the anticipation was so great because it was going to be, it had that feeling that this has got to follow Sergeant Pepper for one thing. So it had to be pretty amazing to follow Sergeant Pepper. So there was a lot of hope, a lot of excitement about it. And when the first pressings came in, of course, they were all numbered.
Yeah.
So the Beatles got all the lowest numbers, but those at Apple, some of us got some pretty low numbers. Mine went, I don't know where it is. Yeah, it was a huge deal. I mean, the press, everything. And the one thing about Apple is at one point I went to work in marketing after Peter Asher left. And my job, I was told very clearly, your job in marketing is to make sure that no one gets the albums before they're released. That was it. You weren't trying to build up any publicity or anything. It was just, don't let anyone near them. It was pretty cool.
Now, Chris, I just want to thank you on behalf of myself, Natalie, and Daniel. It's been a fascinating interview, and I want everyone to go out there, see the new documentary, right? Miss O'Dell. As I said, it's everywhere. You want to see it on Peacock. You want to see it on Tubi. You want to see it on Prime Video, Hoopla, and also Plex. Make sure you see it. Don't wait. It's out now. And also go out online or at your bookshop and go and buy the fabulous book, Miss O'Dell. And I just want to say we thank you so much, Chris, from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you so much, both of you. I've enjoyed this a lot.
Thank
And Daniel.
you.